Hello, friends. So, I am not entirely lazy, just maybe partially. I'm not partially lazy right now either. I want the camera to be close because they're going to be small moves and I want you to be able to see them as much as you can on film. Even if you were here with me, there would be small moves you would have to try to look to find, right? So, you are going to have your mat if you have one, you'll put that down, and then you're going to have a pillow, pretty wide pillow. You can see my blankets folded a few times over top of each other, something to give you a little bit of height underneath your head so your neck and your shoulder don't end up in compression and these weird shapes. We're going to be working on both sides of our body in a shape similar to this. So if you need to click pause and go get your setup, come back down, and then hit play again. We are actually going to start on our backs without the boost underneath our head. We don't want to jam our head up and take away our cervical spine. I'm not going to lecture you on it, but you might think about the position of your head and your neck at night when you sleep and what that does and how it affects your relationship, the spine, the relationship of the neck. There we go. We'll see if I can talk you through this little ditty. Starting on your back. Have the back of the head against the ground. A little bit of a curve there in that neck, right? Move your shoulders down away from your ears and the arms come out just a little bit. And if it's okay, have your feet on the ground with the knees bent because we'll come back to this between sides. And if you prefer to extend the legs out, I'm not going to take that away from you, but we're using this as a test strip. With your feet on the ground and the knees bent, right, I want you to scan through the back of your body. Check in with your feet and find out how your feet feel against the floor, if one foot feels heavier against the earth than the other, if you notice your knees kind of moving to one side or the other, right? Are they weighted? Maybe one is and one isn't. But just kind of notice that. Do notice. And then bring your awareness into your pelvis and the same thing. Notice, what part of your pelvis is against the earth, making contact. Notice if the right side of your pelvis feels heavier or your left side, if it feels like it's tilted, one side moving further to the earth. Also notice, does one hip feel like it's closer up to the top of the mat and one hip closer to the bottom of the mat than the other? We're just trying to figure out what is happening in our body and if we have any asymmetries, if we can identify or just feel those, right? And the work we'll do today is hopefully going to help loosen up some of the tighter stuff and maybe recruit some muscles that aren't used to working. And check into your low back. Is your low back all the way against the floor? Is there a really large gap between the floor and the low back? Right? What's happening there? Bring that up into the middle ribs. Are your middle ribs even on the floor, or are they your low floating ribs? Sorry, or are they all the way up off of the earth? We're not judging any of this, by the way. Please don't judge this. We're just noticing what our body is doing right now. And then notice your shoulder blade area. Right? Are your shoulder blades in contact? Maybe just the bottom tips are. Maybe the upper part is, but the ribs are off. So notice your relationship to the ground right now. Does one shoulder feel heavier than the other? Does one shoulder feel closer up to your ear than the other? And again, we're just noticing. Check in with the neck. Is it on the earth? Is it close to it? Is it far away from it? Is your chin jutting up to the sky or slamming into your chest? And check in with what on the back of your skull is making contact with the earth. So that's our test strip. We'll come back to that. Now you're going to go ahead and you're going to roll onto your right side body. I may or may not be mirroring you, depending on, if you're facing camera, probably I am not mirroring you. But you don't necessarily have to be looking at the device either, right? I try to be my legs in a tabletop, meaning, I have my hips are in line with my shoulders. Let's start there. And I have a nice line going that way. You can always line up with an edge of the mat if you're not sure. And then I have my knees at a 90 degree out from my hips. I have my ankles at a 90 degree from my knees, right? And so I'm in tabletop position on my side body. I have my right arm extended out from the shoulder. Shoulder as far away from the ear as I can with my pillow sit up. Get higher if you can't get it away and it's slammed. And then I'm going to put my left hand on my forearm or maybe on the bicep part of the arm, depends on your arm length. And I'm going to try and get my shoulders to stack on top of one another as well as my hips. By the way, you can put a blanket between your thighs to give that height so that your hips are more neutral as well. Yeah? But I know not everybody has all these props, so I also want to show it without props. So my left elbow is directly out from my left shoulder, and the first move is this. We're going to take an inhale. Let's add breath to it. And with an exhale, let your left shoulder work from the shoulder. The left shoulder starts to slide forward. And hopefully we're going to guide that elbow in line with the right arm, right? So instead of it going down or up, we'll try to bring it straight forward out in front of us. And inhale back. And exhale, slide that left shoulder forward. Yes, the elbow moves forward, but we're not moving from the elbow, we're moving from the shoulder. Inhale back. And exhaling forward. But do notice, does your elbow want to go one way or the other? And you have to add a little guidance to keep it moving straight forward. Inhale back. And one more time. Exhale, let that shoulder move straight forward. You'll notice my whole body's not rocking forward. I'm trying to stabilize from my waist down so it really is isolated in the upper body. We're back to neutral. Now I'm going to go back. This is a smaller motion for most of us. Inhale is neutral. Exhale, move the shoulder back. And again, the elbow is going to move back a little bit, but don't move from the elbow. Move from the shoulder. And inhale, neutral. And just notice, when you move that back, does it want to move up towards the ear, or does the hip want to get involved? Does the jaw want to get involved, right? And can you leave those out of it? Inhale back. If you're like, no, I'm having a hard time, make the motion smaller. Exhale, shoulder moves back behind you just a little bit, doesn't move far. Inhale, neutral. And exhale, move the shoulder back. And by the way, the neutral right now is my shoulder, inhale, neutral, stacked over my right shoulder. My left shoulder stacked over my right shoulder. Now we're going to go through that whole motion. So let your shoulder slide forward, keeping the shoulder away from the ear, right? And then slide it all the way through that neutral to behind you. 2 more times. Forward. Don't let the whole body roll forward. Try to keep everything from the waist down stable. And bringing that back. It's going to have a little bit of movement, but don't let it be a whole body movement. Try to isolate it, right? So it's really just in that upper left side body. We're doing some isolation here, right? Come back to neutral, and you can keep that arm where it is, or you can rest the arm, whichever feels best and keeps your shoulder, that upper trapezius, particularly nice and soft. Forgot to point out if that was working, but we'll come back to it in a second. Now we're going down to the hips. So as if I had my hand on the back of your hip, I want you to imagine that that hip is moving just a little forward, not the whole body. We're isolating the upper body now, yeah? And we're going to slide that hip back. So it's down here, you're seeing the motion. It's not a big one, right? I'm going to keep this pretty stable, my rib cage, and I'm going to let my hip slide forward. Yes, my knee slides from the hip. Inhale back. You can tell I'm on a mission, right? And then from there, keeping the upper body pretty stable, you're going to go ahead and you're going to let that left hip slide forward. And back to neutral, left hip stacked over right. Now, go ahead and let that left hip move back. And neutral. Is one harder than the other? Exhale back. Is it harder to move it forward or back on this side of the pelvis? Inhale, neutral. Exhale back. Keep the jaw soft. Inhale, neutral. One more time, I believe. Exhale back. I was trying to do 4 of each, but I might have goofed up. And bring that back. It's okay if you did one more. Now, without moving anything from the ribs up as much as you can, let the knee slide forward. The hip, not the knee. And then let the hip slide past center, past neutral, back behind you. And sliding it forward. Sliding it back. Is there anywhere that feels sticky, right? And although I'm asking you to move from the hip, maybe notice what's happening in the spine. Is there a place that is twisting more than anywhere else? Is there a part that doesn't want to move into that little twist that's happening in the lower body? And wherever you are, go ahead and finish by moving back and then stack the hips over top of each other. And now we're going to combine forces here. So bring your arm back into position if it came out, right? There's almost this split that happens in that mid torso area. Yeah, the mid waist, I should say. And then from there, you're going to let your shoulder slide forward and your hip move back. And by the way, this is a little mental too. Some people have a hard time figuring this out, and that's okay. Let that left shoulder move back like me. Let the left hip move forward. Come back to neutral. Everything stacks over the one beneath. Let the shoulder move forward and the hip moves back. Back to neutral. And let the shoulder move back and the hip move forward. And back to neutral. Again, check in with your sticky spots. Which is the easier of the two motions now that both pieces, upper and lower body, are involved? Is your jaw getting tense? Is your upper trapezius grabbing on? One more time. I'm not sure where you are in your cycle, but my shoulder's moving forward, my hip back, and coming back to center, and now my shoulder back and my hip forward. And come to the center. You're going to move whatever you're on and roll onto the back body. Come into our back body neutral, how we started this little ditty, and notice your back body. So starting with the feet, what feels rooted, what doesn't? Is one side heavier than the other? Are the knees wanting to sway? A little quicker, but still the same work, right? Check into the pelvis. Does the pelvis feel the same? Is that same hip still heavier? Is that same hip still moving down to the bottom of your mat? What's happening with your pelvis? How does it feel different from right to left? Is the low back the same distance from the floor, right? And are the low floating ribs doing anything differently? Their relationship to the ground, the shoulder blade, upper back area, right? The neck, the back of the head. And now, I apologize, but I'm going to turn my back to you. I want you to see my back body in case that gives you any additional information. And I'm just going to try and turn my voice up since I'll be facing away from camera, right? And I'll turn my head every once in a while just to talk to you to make sure you can hear me. But don't you turn your head, you keep it straight forward. So you'll roll onto your left side body, nice and gentle. You'll bring your bolster, your pillow, whatever you're working with, back in underneath. That left arm, move the shoulder away from the ear, and the arm comes directly out from the shoulder girdle. Right hand on bicep or forearm. And then your legs are in tabletop, hips directly out from knees. The knees have a 90-degree angle, right? So we have this, or I guess I'm saying it wrong. It's a 90-degree angle at the knees between the shins and the thighs. But hopefully you figured that out. Now, working with the upper body first. Again, don't turn your head. I'm going to turn mine so you can hear me. So from there, you're going to let that right shoulder move forward. It doesn't have to be a big move. Probably the smaller the better for most of you who are like, oh, I got to do this, I got to do this. Let the shoulder stack over the left shoulder, which is our new neutral, our center. Let that shoulder slide forward. And then notice if the elbow wants to move to the bottom of your mat or the top of your mat. Inhale, back to neutral. Exhale, as you slide the shoulder forward, does this side feel stickier than the other, the left side, or does it feel a little looser, or whatever word you want to put on it? They're all good. And inhale back. We got one more of those. Exhale. Is your upper trapezius doing the work? Can it come from that shoulder blade sliding forward? And back to neutral. Now we're going to move back. So go ahead and let that right shoulder slide a little back. And inhale, neutral. Notice if your hips are moving. Exhale, just the shoulders. So maybe the motion becomes smaller in order to isolate. Inhale, neutral. Exhale, that right shoulder moves back. Inhale, neutral. Keep the jaw and the tongue soft. And one more time. Exhale, back. Bringing that back to neutral. Now we're going to go through both motions. So inhale forward, shoulder moves forward. And exhale past center. The shoulder is going to slide back. Inhale, shoulder slides forward. Can you keep it out of the rest of the body? And exhale, shoulder slides back. What wants to engage on you? Inhale, shoulder slides forward. right? So this is where we can really start to feel some of the asymmetries. Exhale. Which one is more difficult for you? Moving it forward or back? One more time. Inhale, shoulder slides forward. Is this different than the other side? For many of us, it will be. Exhale, shoulder slides back. And then bring that back to neutral. You can rest that arm or keep it as is, but we're going to go down to the hips, right? So like I have my hand right on the back of that sacrum, right? That back of that hip. Inhale is neutral, and then exhale, let that hip slide forward. For me, this is the hardest of all the motions of the hip. My right hip forward, it tends to sit back usually, right? Inhale, neutral, and all forward right now. Exhale, slide that hip forward. I'm not saying that's what your body should do. You're not in my body. I'm not in yours. And inhale back to neutral. But this is what I find out about myself with these exercises. Exhale, the right hip wants to. You're asking it to slide forward. I don't know if it wants to. Inhale back. Notice that low back, kind of mid back area, right? How does that feel about this movement of the hip moving forward? Is it stickier on this side than the other side, etc.? Inhale, neutral, hips stacked. Now we're moving it back. Right, so go ahead and slide that hip back behind you. For my right hip, this is like, got it, because this is where it always goes, right? Inhale back, and that's caused me some SI joint issues. So that's not necessarily a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a thing. Go ahead and let that hip move back, right? And so this teaches me, and I learn. Inhale back to neutral. Exhale, move the hip back. Let me be more clear with my words. I won't say back every time with everything. And inhale, neutral. Now we're going to move through both motions. Inhale, hip moves forward. And exhale, hip moves back. Does the upper body want to help you? Inhale, move the hip forward. Yes, the knee slides forward, but it's from the hip motion. And exhale, hip moves back. 2 more times. Inhale, move that hip forward, and then move the hip back. I think there's one more time. I lost track. And again, if you do it a 5th time instead of just 4, I think you'll be okay. And slide it all the way back. Now, coming back to neutral, getting your right arm prepared for movement, we're going to add both together. So the right shoulder is going to move forward and the right hip will move back, and then come back to center, and shoulder moves back, hip moves forward, and back to center. Shoulder moves forward, hip moves back, and center, and shoulder moves back, hip moves forward. Again, just noticing what wants to help. 2 more times. Shoulder move forward, hip moves back, and back to neutral, and shoulder moves back, hip moves forward, and back to neutral. Now, from there, and you can do this all day long, by the way. I mean, you can do it longer than what we're doing it and really play with the isolation if you're enjoying it. So from that place, right, you'll come to stillness. You're going to roll onto your back again, moving that blanket out of the way so that you get full contact with the ground, so you can really tune into your back body, tuning into the feet. Noticing if the knees have changed at all. Do they now want to sway in a different direction? Are they more stable in the center, etc.? Maybe they're further to the right than when we started. Whatever your body's doing, notice it. Bring your awareness to the back of the pelvis against the floor. Notice the low back, the low floating ribs, the upper back and the shoulder blades, and how the shoulder blades and shoulders come into contact or don't with the floor. The neck and the back of the head. And again, the chin is a really good indication of what's happening in your neck and your upper back. Right? If it's slammed down to your chest, you're missing your cervical curve. If it's reaching up to the sky, probably your upper back is rounding behind you. There's some tightness, right? And probably in the neck as well. So has that changed at all than the first time you were here? Now we're going to do one more piece to this, friends, right? And what we just did is the walking motion. When we walk, the opposite limbs, right? So my right hip and my left shoulder would lift towards the ceiling. Do that. And soften back down. And now let your right shoulder and your left hip move gently up. And bring them down. So this is our new motion. We'll do this, yeah? So the right hip and the left shoulder gently lift as if I were walking, right? And they come back down to the earth. You don't have to lift the arm. I'm just exaggerating so you know what I'm talking about. Right shoulder and the left hip, they move up and they come back down. We'll do that 2 more times. Right hip and left shoulder. Do the hip and the shoulder want to move into each other? Can they move up and not into each other, shortening your diagonal fascial line? Soften back down. And again, it doesn't have to be a big emotion. I'm a little exaggerated so you can see it. Right shoulder and left hip. So this is what I would actually look like. I wouldn't lift it very high at all. And bring that back down. And you can play with that one again. You can keep doing this. I would do it a little slower rather than fast. I would make the motion a little smaller rather than big. And just start to tune in, right? It helps us figure out the asymmetries in our body. But then the other thing that's kind of fun, and I'm not going to be able to do it with the way the camera is set up, but is to take this to your feet, right? And to walk around with it. And just think about that motion, how the opposite limb moves forward. If they're constantly moving into each other as you walk, what does that do to the front body and the back body, right? If instead we can isolate it and start to fine tune it in the work we just did on the ground, does that then bring us does that then change our relationship when we're actually on our feet and walking and make it potentially a little bit more, I'm going to call it even, right? Instead of one hip being the charger and the doing all the work, or one hip being set way back, or maybe one shoulder bows in, or whatever that is, maybe we can start to find that we have a really upright, beautiful body where the limbs work in unison, right? The joints. Okay. Enough talking. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to namaste you from here. Since I can't sit up, I don't think, and be seen fully by the camera. So on the ground, why don't we bring our hands together in front of our chest with our head up. You don't have to be looking at a device right now. And close the eyes. Take an inhale. We're not going to bow in, but we're going to think about bowing, right? And just taking a moment of gratitude here, that we gave ourselves this space and time to move gently and softly with awareness in our body. Namaste, friends. You might just stay here and lay down on the ground and just be mellow for a while.